Welcome everybody. It's great to see you all here. I'm Tom Flanagan. I'm the superintendent. Really appreciate you all being here tonight, both in person and on our virtual, or on Zoom. Thank you. We are at a really critical point in this process of the Burlington High School BHS BTC. We're calling it BHS BTC 2025. Because we are aiming to build a new high school by 2025. And so we, as you know, have a number of different conceptual design options that are out. You saw those coming in. Those are at the high level, the conceptual level, and the next level after we make a determination on the conceptual level of design is to get into the details of design. So these are again high level, aiming toward an April 27th school board meeting where the school board will, after hearing your feedback tonight, we're going to put a survey out after this and ask you to fill out the survey to give us your feedback. We'll be asking the school board to make a decision on April 27th about the design that they think is the most appropriate for the new high school. So looking forward to the conversation tonight. It'll look a little bit like the school board meeting. We're going to go through the designs. We'll be here for a question and answer, and then we'll have some time to break out into smaller groups and talk through some of those designs in more detail. And with that, I'll kick it over to Russ.
Great. Thank you, everybody. So as Superintendent Flanagan mentioned, we're going to ask you to fill out a survey. Actually, that survey is sitting in front of many of you. There's a tiny little 3/4 pager there, and you can just scan that with your iPhone, or you can go to www.bsdvt.org to complete that survey online. And if you feel like you want to go home and chew on it, that's fine too. But any feedback that you can give in this process, we want to make sure that we're hearing from the public and we're hearing from you. So my name is Russ Ellick. I'm the communication specialist at Burlington School District, and I'm just really happy to see so many people. It feels like we're finally starting to be able to get out and see people and get back to normal a little bit, and I really am grateful for you all showing up here today. So before we jump into this presentation, just a few housekeeping items for you. So there's a lot of information that we're going to give you in about 25 minutes time. And so there are materials in the back of the room that if you haven't picked them up yet, I'd encourage you to grab them. They have floor plans, they have the site plans, and you can sort of thumb through them at your own leisure. And they can be found on our website. So if you don't want to take that paper material home, it's on our homepage and you really can't miss it. So I talked about the survey that's in front of you. As you're looking for the materials in the back, you're going to see one that is color-coded, and I'm calling it the stoplight document, even though the architects are not telling me to call it that. But basically, you'll see that it's color-coded red, green, and yellow, and Carl Franceschi, one of our architects, will talk about that a little bit. I think that's really helpful to think about what some of the pros and cons or the challenges of opportunities of these spaces are. So that could be helpful as you're thinking through this. We're also not going to spend a lot of time tonight presenting and discussing the specific floor plans. You've probably seen them on the boards in the hallway right there. We will, if you have studied these plans, we will take questions about them, and if you do have questions about them when we get to that Q&A portion, we can answer them. But for the sake of time, we're going to skip over the really detailed sort of initial floor plans this evening as well. Once we go through the presentation, like I said, we will have time for questions and answers. We're joined here tonight by the superintendent. Carl Franceschi of DRA is on the screen. Thanks for being here, Carl. We have our architect team here from Freeman French Freeman. So thank you. Jesse is up here, and you have a couple of your teammates in the crowd as well, right? And representatives from Colin Lindbergh's office, as well as Director Spalding and Director Lavery, who can answer questions about anything else that you can think of, and I probably won't be answering any of these questions. I'm just going to give them all to you guys. We're trying to have this engaging piece at the end, so we might not have an opportunity to answer every single question tonight. My ask of you is if we don't get to your question, put it in the survey and make sure that you leave us your contact information. Our goal is to answer questions for people and get all the information out there that we can. Just want to make sure that we're good here. All right, so as we jump into the presentation, there's a few things that I want to go over so that you're all aware of, because we're not going to talk about it every single time we get to every design. And that is that all of these designs share a number of the same features. So as you're thinking about how big are the buildings that we're presenting, or what are some of those features, these are things that you're going to want to keep in mind. So all of our designs today include approximately 300,000 square feet of space, and this is in alignment with our recent district program needs assessment. All include the same educational program elements that are listed on the space needs summary, and all of these documents are public documents on our website as well. All of our designs tonight include the potential for a 3-station gym, a larger cafeteria commons, and a larger auditorium. All have discrete vehicular circulation for bus drop-off and for car drop-off, and for service access to Burlington Technical Center. All of these designs have dedicated building entrances for visitors, for bus drop-off, for car drop-off, and for Horizons and On Top and Burlington Technical Center. The high school entrances all will lead to a shared multi-level student commons, which will help with monitoring, access, security, and community building. All of these designs, we believe, offer an excellent opportunity for sustainable design. They all have good solar orientation and good indoor-outdoor relationships, which is something we heard loud and clear from our students, that they want a building that is connected to their outdoors. All show a potential location for future district offices, but I want to be clear that this is not part of the program that we're bringing to you today. When we first started working with our architects, we gave them a sort of a challenge of, we know that we've needed a new central office space for a really long time. What would it look like in the new building? And the architects came back to us and said, that does not work at all. So that is not part of what you're hearing. That will not be part of the bond request. But we just wanted to be transparent about that process to this point. The existing bike parking at the old site is for 40 bikes. All of these designs have space for more than 240 bikes. And the overall existing parking at the previous space has 350 parking spots, traditional parking spots. All of these have 375 parking spots. All right, and so finally, and this might sound silly to some of you, but a lot of the initial and frequent feedback that we've gotten from our steering team, from our students in the City and Lake semester, from staff even, is that there is a preference for designs that incorporate the outdoors and more specifically usable courtyards. So that feedback is something that we've heard loud and clear. That's something that we're going to accommodate in any of the designs, and we'll touch on it here. But I just want you to rest assured, no matter what concept the board picks on April 27th, we are really trying to tie this thing into indoor-outdoor use and usable courtyards, okay? So with that, Carl Franceschi and I are going to lay out the options for you tonight, and we'll do a Q&A at the end, and then we'll do a breakout room or breakout sessions throughout here for those that want to stick around and give some more feedback to our architect teams. Sound good? All right, Carl, let's jump in.
Hey, thanks for us. Thanks for that, and I'm very happy and excited to join everyone. I really appreciate all the technical logistics behind the scenes that's making this possible for those of you in the room and those of us remotely. Appreciate that. We want to share with you the conceptual options and give you plenty of time for discussion and questions afterwards. Just a little bit of orientation at first. As many of you know, the old BHS Tech Center was on Institute Road. And we were given, as designers, an identifiable sort of buildable zone for the new high school tech center. You can see it's basically where the parking lot is and the green space adjacent to North Ave. And it was sort of free and clear of the existing building, even though the building has been vacated, except for what's known as A building. That's the cafeteria, the auditorium, and the gymnasium. But after studying it and looking at some of the conditions there, the limitation on size, some of the topography, we really thought it was wise to think about an expanded building zone as well. So we have options that address both the initial buildable zone and the expanded zone as well. And as has been mentioned, there was a great deal of engagement in this project from the very start at many different levels. including visioning sessions with the community, with students, with teachers, staff, administrators, parents, the school board, obviously, and we've developed a sort of set of guiding principles that will follow us through this entire process and has been part of the concept development, particularly these diagrams that suggest ways of organizing the educational components in the building.
Thanks, Carl. One thing I want to point out real quick, sorry to interrupt you. I know you're expecting me to interrupt you in a little bit. We did all of these introductions, and I am remiss that I am so sorry I forgot. We also have here tonight Principal McBride from the high school has been really, really involved. She's in the back of the room. And Director Jason Gingold, I believe, is also here, who has been really involved. Thank you both for being here. I know Principal McBride may have to leave a little bit early. We're all familiar with having sick kids, so I hope everything's fine with you, but really grateful to both of you for, this has been a lot. It's been a year and a half of you sort of pitching in and finding new building spaces and helping us move forward. So thank you both for being here and for being a part of this process. If you have questions for Principal McBride or Jason Gingold specifically, that if they're not here during that section, you can come find me and I will get those questions answered for you. Thanks, Carl.
This slide here is just a recap of what Russ mentioned, that for your information, all of the options about the city have certain characteristics in common. They all meet the program with the same educational components. They're all relatively the same size of 300,000 square feet, and so on and so forth. But the things we really want to focus on in trying to differentiate these are looking at those inherent characteristics that might differ in each of the options. And those include cost. Even though the buildings are the same size in each of these, there are different site costs and implications with the development of the site and from the grading, site utilities, roadways, and so forth that do somewhat affect the cost of each option. We really want to look at the configurations of the buildings and the relationship of the major components, particularly the tech center and the high school, and how they're organized on the site, and how the overall building is relating to both North Avenue and Institute Road 2. Those are things to pay attention to as we look at these options. So here are the 5 options. There's really 4 options with one variation. We've labeled them A, B, C, and D, and the C1 is a variation of option C. You can see the costs there. As I mentioned, these are project costs, and they do vary from about $181 million up to $196 million. We'll get into that a little bit in a moment, and we'll get into them in detail, but we wanted to sort of give you the overview of the 5 different options at first.
All right.
Here's the option, Russ.
All right, so let's start with option A. And for those of you who are following along on Zoom, we're aware that it's difficult to hear Carl, so we're working with RETN to get the speakers turned up for you. So bear with us, and we will try to make sure that you get some better volume. And Carl, if you could try to speak up a little bit, that might help as well. But sorry to take away like the big reveal to do housekeeping items, but this is option A, which you can see on screen. So option A is going to allow for continued use of building A through the first 2 years of construction. It will place BTC to the north side of the building. And on this, you'll see a parking garage. We want to make sure that you know that this is actually an optional feature. It would provide drop-off at the main level and parking in close proximity to the building. That is about, I think, $7.5 million more, and that's not included in the estimate. So that's an option for the property, but it's not in the building right now.
The organizing factors in all of these designs, you'll notice that the new building kind of conforms to the available site there. It's free of the forest and the ledge on the uphill side. It also sets back from Institute Road enough to get a driveway through with some visitor parking and an entrance at this side of the building to handle both those people arriving from public transit, from the student parking area on the south side of Institute Road as well. And then, as Russ mentioned, there is an alternate drop-off where buses can be separated from cars to enter into both the tech center and the new high school. The tech center also has that requirement of service access. It has these shops and high bay spaces that have overhead doors that require truck access. So you'll see that in each option as well. Here's the main level floor plan of this option A. As was mentioned, all of these concepts in various ways take advantage of the student commons as an organizing element. It's not just the cafeteria, it's also an area where the students can gather before school, after school. It serves as kind of the lobby for the gym and auditorium as well in many of these options. And it's always adjacent to the administration and a main entrance for good access and supervision, and really becomes the heart of the school. The academic portions of these options are shown in various colors here, and they're broken down in scale so that they really reflect those earlier diagrams from the visioning sessions, where there's a variety of sizes of components: distributed science lab, full-size classrooms, half-size classrooms, collaborative areas, and teacher planning areas in these sort of clusters of space. The tech center in this option is organized and joined at the student commons here with an outdoor entrance as well as an indoor connection. Here's what it would look like three-dimensionally. Again, we want to emphasize this is not really meant to be architecture at this point. It's a massing diagram to show you what these solutions would look like. They're generally all, as you'll see, multi-story. In this case, there are 4 levels of the building. As it steps up the hill, the tech center occupies the upper 3 levels here. You can see in this, we have modeled the parking garage, which would infill the footprint of the A building once it's removed. All these options too, I want to point out that the athletic fields remain undisturbed. So the track and football field and baseball field remain in their current configuration and location.
Great.
So that's option A.
Thank you, Carl. So we'll jump right into option B. Option B, this shows a more compact scheme based on building over the existing high school location. And so when you hear us say building A, that is a building in the current Burlington High School. That's not option A, but so this builds over the current existing high school location. In this option, we see BTC is located behind BHS and on the north side, closely connected to BHS near the student commons. And again, I just want to remind people that courtyards are inherent in all of our designs. It's been important, so I want to reassure the community, as I did the board last week, that if we were to pick this option, you're not necessarily picking the small courtyard option, so rest assured.
The other thing, just to highlight there, is that we heard from students the need for light. And so in all of the design options, there will be lots of light, whether through the courtyards, but also through windows.
In all of our solutions here, virtually every educational space does get natural light. That's one advantage of having these courtyards, as well as sort of the shape of the buildings in general. In this option B, you can see by being a fairly compact and centrally located building, it works well in relation to the parking on the uphill side, the parking and drop-off and transit on the lower side, and it also reserves a fair amount of space towards North Avenue for future expansion. We think that's always prudent in high school design and a building that's going to be here for 50 or 60 years. We want to think about how could it be expanded if the need arose in the future. And the organization of this plan, as Russ mentioned, the tech center are these green areas. Those are some of their program areas. They're stacked on 3 floors, but they join the high school at the multi-level student commons in the center of the plan here, with the gym on one side, the auditorium on the other side, and again, the academic areas organized in clusters around a courtyard. Here's what this one would look like, option B. In 3 dimensions, basically 3-story buildings on the end and a 4-story building in the center, with that lower level entrance here to serve whether you arrive by bus or by student parking or get dropped off. And then there's an upper level entrance coming into that same student commons in the center of the complex. That's option B.
Great, thank you, Carl. So now we have option C. In option C, what you're going to see is a linear arrangement, which is, again, based on building over the existing high school location and parallel to Institute Road. In this configuration, we have Burlington Technical Center facing Institute Road on the west side, and it's connected to BHS on multiple levels.
You can see in this footprint again, the building is sort of centrally located, but as Russ mentioned, Tech Center now fronts on Institute Road and has a little more visibility and a linear connection to the proposed high school. The common still acts as the central entry, whether you're coming from the uphill parking areas or the lower drop-off bus areas and student parking arrival point. Again, a fair amount of the site is reserved for future expansion, and you can see how the building, again, relates well to the forest here and the outdoors. And as the academic areas are organized around the courtyard, the student commons in the center, and the large volumes of the gymnasium and the auditorium are now turned 90 degrees to be sort of parallel to that commons area. And you can see the main organizing corridor, this linear corridor which ties together the tech center at one end and the high school at the other end. So that's option C, and here's what
could you go
in 3 dimensions, parallel to Institute Road, again, 4 stories in some areas, 3 stories at the other end. In the parking on the uphill side, neatly arranged in trays stepping up the hill.
Perfect. And then I want to point out too, when Carl talks about space for future expansion, again, not something in this project, but Carl and French Freeman and Colin Lindbergh's office, lots of experience working with schools. And one of the things that they'll tell you is it's smart to have identified on your land some place that you could easily build onto your school. In case something happens, you're not talking about building an entirely new school. If you can just add on stuff and you don't have to use trailers, you can have a real building that connects seamlessly. So again, not part of the project, but these are things that we're thinking about as we're going forward. So now we're on option C.1. So we promised everyone 3 to 4 conceptual options. We're bringing you 5. C.1, it's a variation of option C, but what you're seeing here is that we've shifted option C east a little bit, and this is going to allow a more phased approach to construction. So it allows for continued use of A building during the construction of the new gym, auditorium, and kitchen, However, BTC programs in this scenario would have to continue in their temporary locations. Our estimate is that BTC in this scenario would likely open 12 to 18 months after Burlington High School opens.
As Russ mentioned, we wanted to provide some variation in the options to show a possible phased approach to leaving Building A, which is shown in orange here on the plan, and constructing the new high school first, breaking this plan right at the red dotted line there. So this part would be under construction while A building remains. Once the new spaces could come online, the auditorium, the gym, the kitchen, A building could be demolished and the tech center would then be constructed at that point in time, adjacent to what would be an occupied Burlington High School. This does shift the building, even though it's the identical footprint of option C, it shifts it to the east, a little bit off center now, and a little bit less space for future expansion, but it still fits in the buildable area here, and would be the same floor plan and the same massing as option C. So that's those 2 options actually.
All right, and so for our final option, option D, Carl will tell you that our architects, our design team wanted to come up with something a little bit more out of the box. So what we're showing here is an option that replaces the current Institute Road with a new south route that will create a more consolidated campus. It aligns a new building facing North Avenue with BTC entry and bus entry to the rear. It's a compact L-shaped footprint with BTC and BHS on separate wings of the building, but sharing that central core space. And we would need city support to coordinate the new road, and this would most likely take longer to build. We don't think that we could do this on the 2025 timeline, so that's something for consideration for the community as well.
And as Russ mentioned, we felt this, even though it's a bit out of the box and does require the, relocation and construction of a public road as part of the project, it has that we thought are worth consideration. Among them being that the building is more of a civic presence, right, very close and parallel to North Avenue, more accessible to both bikes and bus public transportation, with that frontage along there, and also a sort of safer, more compact campus as well, where the building, the athletic fields, and the majority of the parking are all now, within one campus, and students are no longer, crossing the public road to get to those various functions. It does require, as we say, a bit more time as well for the permitting and the construction of that new road. But we have met on a preliminary basis with the city, and they are willing to consider this, and thought there were no deal breakers, so to speak, in considering this in the future too. Here's what the plan would look like of that L-shaped building. As we said, the tech center occupies one wing, the high school occupies the other wing, again organized around courtyards, and in the center are the common core spaces of the gymnasium, the auditorium, the student common on multiple levels, where there's an upper level on North Avenue and a lower level entrance from that bus stop, the old Institute Road alignment. And here's what it would look like three-dimensionally. It is, again, it does have very good solar orientation. You can see that the playing fields are left unchanged. The new road goes around the perimeter of the site on city-owned property there, and the old Institute Road is sort of terminated in this drop-off circle to the lower level entrance there. And it's basically a three-story building. As the ground slopes to the south here, there is a lower level possible at one end of the building. And on the North Ave side, because of the topography, it's only a two-story building fronting the road there. So that's option D. And here's sort of a summary then for your recollection as you begin to think about and bring up your questions and discussion, A, B, C, and D. And again, you can see the range of price tags, basically 181 million up to 196 million. And as we said, the reason for that variation generally has to do with site work and or schedule. Option A and option C.1 are a bit more expensive due to that schedule impact, where they are built in phases, so they take a little bit longer. Likewise, option D, and option D has the added expense of a new roadway being created around the site as well. We want to point out too, here are the floor plans, again, just for your recollection. I'm glad you have hard copies there in the room to refer to as well, because I know it's a lot of information to take in as well. This is that chart, and I know you can't read all the text here, but hopefully the graphics somewhat convey the message too, where the five options are arrayed across the top, and then a host of criteria are listed down the left-hand column here. Criteria that were developed with the development team, with the administration, to analyze each of these options. And they include such things as educational accommodation, how well do each of these plans as concepts accommodate the vision that the district has for this new school? How flexible are they? What potential for expansion? Project cost is a criteria, and so on. So you can see the various criteria there, and then there are text here talking about the pros and cons, but kind of summarized by the colors. And it is like a traffic light in the sense that green is good, and red is less advantageous. Yellow is kind of in the middle here in looking at these. So as you look down these columns, you can sort of see where there's more green or there's red, and help everyone who's evaluating these, come to some conclusions. So we're glad, again, you have copies of those that you can refer to as well. Just to remind people, too, that the project costs that were quoted are total project costs for the construction of the new school, as well as the related soft costs, meaning things like furniture and equipment and professional fees and contingencies are all in there. So that's that 181 to 196 million. But one word, it does not include the demolition and remediation. That is a sort of separate project from the construction of the new school, and as we understand it, will be separately funded as well, not anticipated to be part of the bond vote in November. So that's kind of an explanation on the project cost, and I know it's a lot of information. We appreciate your patience through all this, and I guess now's the time for questions, and I'll leave it on this maybe over slide here. Russ or whoever's in the room that can actually MC.
Jeff, do we have a wireless mic for questions in the crowd? So Jeff's going to get a wireless mic, and we'll get our first question, but we have a couple of questions in the chat. So one question is, for option D, would construction costs of the new road be shared with the city? And I think that's probably a Nathan and Marty question at the start.
Well, I think we don't know the answer to that just yet. It was certainly a conversation that we broached with them. Yeah. It was certainly a question that we asked the city, but we didn't get a direct answer at this time. But it could certainly be something that could be shared with the city. What I can say is typically when a developer is building a new road that will be turned over to the city for a building project that they're responsible for, that cost is usually absorbed by the owner.
And just to add, we've been working closely with the city throughout this whole process. We do need to be mindful of the overall debt capacity, and so that's something that as we work to be responsible to the citizens of Burlington, we want to both balance having a beautiful high school that serves the needs of our community. I think it's a really amazing and exciting opportunity for our community right now. And we will be conservative, and we will be really disciplined in our approach to make sure that the options that we're putting forward and that we end up going with, I imagine, will make sure that we're being very mindful of the impact to individual taxpayers and to the citizens of Burlington. We're really trying to strike that balance, and it's a tricky balance to strike. The other thing I wanted people to know is that if you've been following this throughout, in the beginning we'd been talking about building the high school while we kept the old high school in place. We are still using parts of the A building, which is the building that houses the gym, the cafeteria, and the auditorium. Almost all of these designs contemplate us not keeping those buildings. And as Carl mentioned, we need to seek funding, and we believe there is funding to support the demolition and remediation of the site. So that's something that we're actively seeking right now, and we're not anticipating it being a part of the bond, but we also want you to know that it is a part of the equation. And now with these conceptual designs, it's an earlier part of the equation that we need to deal with immediately.
Rachel, did you have a question?
Yeah, a couple. So one is kind of connected to what you just mentioned. I just wanted to be able to understand the consequences or the downsides of not having building A available. Like, what are the additional costs?
Yeah, so the question is, what would the costs be of not having a building now? It would be a significant operational lift for us, where we'd have to figure out solutions to the food making. We have a kitchen there. We're making food out of that kitchen. the auditorium space and the gym space. So those are spaces that we'd need to find space for those activities to happen. We believe that we could find those spaces in our district. I was actually much more worried about that initially, and then after talking to my team, they felt like, no, we can find we can make that work. But there would be a cost with that too.
Okay. My second question is just around remediation in terms of what you know or don't know about the soils of, any contaminants where the existing building is. And, I can't remember, I think it was option A that didn't build on the current location and then the others do. So what do you know or not know about that?
Right, so we have looked at the soils. There's not a problem with the soil on the site and contamination of the soil, we don't believe. But the soils right next to the walls of the building, where the PCBs have seeped down, because the PCBs are in the caulking material of the windows. They're also in the glue underneath the floor tiling, so they've seeped into the foundation of the floor. Those kind of seep down into the soil. And so we've detailed sort of the perimeter around. So Director Spalding can talk more about that, but we're not concerned generally about the soils on the site, but we will have to remediate the soils where the building sits.
Like in any of the scenarios?
In any scenario.
In every scenario, it's the same level of cleanup to the soils and the same level of demolition to the building and disposal of the building materials that have PCBs as well as, asbestos in them.
And then there you go. Thank you, Victor. Yep. Do next question, and then we'll take one from the chat.
Hi there.
And if you wouldn't mind saying your name and letting us know how you're connected to the community.
My name's Matthew Kim, and I'm connected because I live across the street from the high school.
Perfect.
I think I fall into the category of abutters, if I'm not mistaken. So my question is how were the impacts to our community, 40 families who live across the street, considered, and how were the impacts assessed?
That's a good question. Director Spalding, do you want to talk a bit about that?
I think this is one avenue where we're reaching out to abutters and everybody in the community to provide that feedback.
But there was no, none of the butters or any, not just in our development, but the surrounding neighborhoods were brought in on when design criteria were established.
Got it. So we'd be happy to talk more with you about that. Absolutely. This is why this process is so important. We genuinely want to get feedback. We want you to hear from us. We want to hear from you. We need this to be a process that the community feels like they've been a part of. So apologies that we haven't met already, but let's connect afterwards. I would love to talk. And like I said, we're open to all feedback. We believe, even though sometimes it's hard to answer hard questions, it's better to answer those hard questions earlier on or at this point now in the process, as soon as we can in the process, than wait. So we're here to have those conversations with you. Thanks.
Question in the chat is, when are we starting to build the new school? They're also asking which option did people pick. The board will select the option on April 27th, Jeremy, but is there a timeline for when we're going to start to build the new school?
Roughly, August of 2023.
Great. We have a question in the crowd, and let's try to make sure everybody gets one question first, and I have a couple in the chat that we can take too, but we do have plenty of time. Right now, we're looking good on time, so.
I have lots of questions which I want to ask now, but I guess my first question is the April 27th date for the board selecting the design, cast in concrete? And I'm curious because that's 15 days from now, and I don't know how you're expecting us to have complete input or more input about design or criteria if that's the case. Does it, first of all, I thank you for all the design work, and I thank you for this format. I think it's terrific, but it does raise concerns for me relating to designing a school for school purposes and designing a school that's part of a community and has more community orientation or perspective that I think could probably be more saleable to the community. And I'm particularly concerned that I don't see how For instance, in terms of the spaces that are dedicated on the plans, I don't see lots of areas dedicated for counseling beyond schools, meaning are there going to be on-site counselors relating to housing issues, mental health issues? Are there the spaces that I see for community spaces relating to the auditorium? I assume that's just directed to the school. Is any consideration being given to a community center space, another auditorium, or to have interactive services between an auditorium and another room so that the community could actually use the space for other purposes besides academic? But for in terms of counseling, we have many people coming into the community who may not be familiar with the community, who may have needs relating to language, housing, mental health services, drug counseling, police presence. What in terms of design orientation or your design criteria, can you explain briefly and explain what criteria are used and were implemented for this plan to expand upon the presence of those services on site to benefit the school kids and to benefit their families within a community orientation? Because now all those facilities are mostly off-site, and I think that's a problem. I think that we can more intensively help our children if they were on site. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I think the first is that we discussed this a bit at the school board meeting, our last school board meeting. Was that last week? Yeah. Only last week. The importance of our school buildings being buildings for our community, in addition to being buildings for our students and operating as schools. So that we have policy on that because we historically have valued the community in schools and our school buildings as being a part of the community. So there's actual school board policy that requires that we have space for our community in our schools, and there's access. That is something that we are fully committed to and plays into the design. The other part of that is that many services, I haven't had a chance to see that yet because I moved here during a pandemic and we've been closed for the most part, and so we're sort of opening up now, and I'm starting to see more of that, so I'm excited to see that. The other thing that is important, I think, for everybody to know is that our schools operate as community centers now. We are offering mental health services, we are offering interpretation and translation, we are offering sort of intake and support for new families to our community. That school has changed to be a place that serves many more needs of the broader community than just the education of our children. Obviously, our main goal is students and their learning, but we serve as a community space much more than we used to in schools across the country. And I've been impressed in Burlington with how much we do here beyond what other school districts do. So that will be a part of our design thinking, absolutely, how we create community schools, community space within our school to provide additional services. We're not at that stage yet in the development. These are conceptual designs, so Carl can talk to that. But he's helped me understand, and Carl has designed many schools, as has the broader team, that we're at a really early stage of sort of mapping out what this building could look like, mostly looking at the number of stories, the square footage, the place it's laid out on the land, and what the soil looks like underneath. We're not yet at the design principle stage of that, but we're hearing that feedback now. We have a survey out. We want you to keep giving us that kind of feedback. We want to hear that. So with that, I'll kick it over. I'll ask Carl to give some detail on the design.
Carl's got a few things he can show us, and then I just also wanted to remind the community that we really intentionally put Burlington High School as part of our new 5-year strategic plan. And so we're really looking at the curriculum, the programming, the services. So beyond what this building offers, and we can do, like, we are committed to doing that for Burlington High School for the next 5 years as part of our new strategic plan too. So we believe those things are going to dovetail really nicely together, and we're not looking to offer less services than what we're doing now.
If I could, Russ, and Superintendent, I could add, kind of, as you say, sort of an outsider's perspective, having designed schools in other districts, that the program that in that 300,000 square feet is a very robust program in terms of student services and student support and even family support compared to other programs that we've seen for comparable high schools. We still have time in the subsequent design phases to work out, public access and how those students and families are welcomed and served in the building. But the square footage is there in that 300,000 square feet. And also, it's a very inclusive school with not only the tech center, but the Horizons program, the On Top program, the intensive special needs program, so that children of students of all types are being accommodated and served very well in this program. And all of these options, as I say, have those components, and the details of exactly where they're positioned in the building and so forth are still to be worked out. But we appreciate the input and are, as I say, impressed with the amount of attention that social needs and emotional needs are given to the students and their families here.
And the first part, thanks, Carl. The first part of that question was about the timeline and the April 27th school board meeting. So we do have a project plan that has pretty specific timelines that map to August 2025, the school opening in August 25. It's an aggressive timeline. But I think the important thing to know is that we've done a lot of engagement with our community, around the re-envisioning process before this project. So we're bringing that to bear to this project, and we're trying to do as much as we possibly can right now of hearing from you. I've mentioned the survey. We also have a number of school board members here who are interested in hearing your direct feedback. The school board members are also going to be voting on and making a decision in whatever fashion they make that decision on the 27th. So they're here to also hear from you and to help inform their decisions. So it is an aggressive timeline, and that's because we currently don't have a high school building, and we are in a department store, and it's a great department store. It's serving our needs right now, but it's not a school. And we need a school. We have about 1,000 students. We've dropped to about 960 at the last count. That is a big and robust high school. It's not the size of other high schools around the state that have 300, 200 students. It is a big, thriving high school, and the students in that school deserve a space to learn. So that's why the timeline is what it is.
I'd just like to add is the architectural team, we've been working on this for about 4.5 months, and think of this as the beginning of the process. It's not an end, it's just a point in time to look at comparative options that really have to be refined and developed through what we call schematic design, bond vote, design development, construction documents. So there's plenty of time to input and refine these individual spaces. And if you go on the website, you can find this educational program that Carl is referencing, and you can really drill down and look at some of the individual spaces that you might be interested in. And those are square footage spaces that need to be refined and morphed together once we pick a directional option. So we've been at this for a little while. We have a steering committee of about 27 people. We've had the programming sessions with staff, teachers, student sessions. About a month ago, we had our first public forum. So this is just a series of the whole process that everybody is welcome to join in on.
Thank you, Jesse. We have a question in the chat, which I don't know if we're going to be prepared to answer, but I'm going to throw it to the team. Can option D be rotated and moved west and kept on the existing building site to eliminate the cost of road relocation? And if we can't answer that today, if we want to put that in the parking lot, but as something to consider, that's fine too.
Well, yeah, anything is possible at this stage. Nothing's built. But the reason why option D works so well is the compact L nature and creating a more flat site. The other options have to work with the topographic surveying of stepping up the hill, and that's why you see the different configurations. But we all have grown to love option D for various reasons, but it does have its cons as well, so.
And we would like to hear what aspects of the options people, admire most, because there is a possibility of tweaking and refining these options and say, I like whatever it is about option D, and maybe we can incorporate that in one of the other options, and so forth. So in addition, I believe there's room on the survey where you can not only tell us which option you prefer, but why and what aspects of it are most advantageous.
Victor, we have a question here with David Kirk, and as you get settled here, the question in the chat is about the square footage of the parking in the plans. There is, in all of these designs, we're incorporating about 25 more parking spaces than we currently have. David?
All right, so I just, in listening to what's going on, by the way, I'm David Kirk, I'm just Ward 7 resident, live in the city, pay taxes. I'm glad that the school board has been, and the school steering committee has been working on this for months. It's unfortunate that the public has had one meeting a month ago, and within another month from now, we're going to have the school board vote on the thing. It doesn't seem like community involvement has been much. I've been trying to follow this as of late to figure out why we're spending $200 million and why remediation hasn't been spoken about. I know that I've heard some talk that it can't be done or shouldn't be done, but just to myself, I haven't heard anything out in the open why we can't do that. We're using building A. So I guess my questions are more along the lines of could we save money by leaving building A? We're using it now, can it be used? And what is the life expectancy of this building? Because at the last meeting, I heard something about 50 years, and I was appalled at that the building's life expectancy is 50 years, and I think that might have been a misspeak, but that's kind of what I heard from the design team. But I don't know. Maybe it is only 50 years, and we have to be thinking about a $600 million build in 50 years. I mean, where does this end? Is it logical to keep building A and redesign? And I know you have a tight timeline because we don't have a high school, but at the same time, you have to look at the taxpayers and what is $300 million going to look like, or $200 million going to look like on my tax bill in 5 years?
Yeah, I think we are taking that question really seriously, and we understand that that's something we need to be really responsive to and responsible in the next steps here. I go back to something that Jesse said a moment ago, which is that we are at a point, we're headed toward a November bond vote, right? We're going to be looking to engage in multiple different ways, whether it's through meeting on Friday afternoon or meeting next week. I'm happy to do that with anybody here, and sort of talking it through and hearing your feedback, your thoughts, your concerns, or your ideas. And that goes all the way until November. We're just at that conceptual design phase. It feels heavy because there's going to be a decision the school board will make on the 27th. But we're still at that high level of design phase, and there's still a lot of room for conversation and discussion about that. Building A, we were told by the EPA, the Department of Environmental Conservation, and the Department of Environmental Conservation, when I asked them if it was safe to go back in the building to have school, they said no. No one in the room thought it was safe to go back in the building. So that's what led to us needing to leave the building. Since then, and that has to do with the amount of hours that you spend in the building. So there's a certain amount of time and time exposure in the building that we have to be aware of now as we're using the A building. The A building, again, as with all the buildings, the issue is that, number one, they weren't accessible to begin with. And we were already needing to do significant updates to all of the different all the buildings, right? And then pile on, that was $70 million. Pile on top of that, we find PCBs in the wall, in the caulking. Then we learn it is in the walls. It is seeped into the concrete brick walls. It is in the glue mastic underneath the tiling. It's seeped into the concrete foundation. It is seeped into the soil outside, and it is in the ceilings, because it's also in lighting fixtures that they've used. So it's everywhere in the building. And what we've heard most as a community is these action levels related to air, PCBs in the air. But what we're being regulated on by the DEC and the EPA now is not just airborne PCBs. So those action levels don't mean a whole lot actually anymore. It is about the building materials also. And so we're at a point where the floors needs to be redone, the walls need to be redone, the ceiling needs to be redone, the soil needs to be fixed. That's not possible for us to do in a fiscally responsible way to get to a place where we have a decent school building, and even to save very much money, I don't think, at this point. So that's how we got to where we are. It's an unfortunate situation. I mean, it really is not. We were put in a really bad situation 2 years ago in the summer of 2020 when we learned about this, and it's a crisis. It was a crisis then. It remains a crisis now. So we're going to be we're putting $11 million. We received funding through the American Rescue Plan. We're putting $10 million from that in. We've maintained a surplus. We've been sound fiscal stewards over the past 7 years. We've been running a surplus, which we believe is wise to do on a budget like ours. And we're able to put some money toward that. So we have $11.5 million set aside already to defray a cost. We believe, I can't promise this yet, but I believe there's federal funding to help pay for the remediation of the building, because this is a toxic site. And we believe there's federal funding for that. We still have to, get that federal funding. I don't want to promise it to you, but that's why we don't have it in the bond ask. And we're not anticipating it in the bond ask. Things could change. If they do, we're going to be really open with you all about that. But that's, and then we also, the technical education is a priority of our governor, and career technical education, workforce development. $50 million of this building is career and technical education for workforce development. So we're making asks, right? Okay, so we want technical education support for our region, because the BTC serves half students from a whole catchment region, not just our school. We need help, and we're not going to be afraid to ask for help, and we want your help in asking for help too. The other piece of this is further down the line, but our school board has done really amazing work advocating for a fair and equitable funding formula. Right now, taxes are higher than they should be to provide the program that we currently provide, because we have a funding formula that does not equitably fund English learners, students who are learning English, students with IEPs, and students with disabilities, and students living in poverty. They've done a huge amount of work. It actually is a bill that was not going to be picked up. And then with the hard work and hustle of your Burlington School Board and other school boards in the region, they're picking that up, and it crossed over from Senate Ed to House Ways and Means, and they're taking it seriously. And we're after them on that. This is about having equity. It's also about not perpetuating systemic racism in our funding formula. So we're fighting hard for funding to better support our programs, but also to support the citizens of Burlington and in this ask. So I wanted just to be real clear that it's not just a straightforward ask that we're making here. There are kind of multiple different parts of this work that we're doing.
Let's grab Charles in the front, and then I have a question on the chat.
Hey, thanks so much for everybody's efforts. This is pretty exciting. Disappointed that the
youngest of my kids is going to graduate in a year and miss all the fun here. But maybe a comment or two and a couple of questions. Option D, to me, certainly has some really nice appeal to it. I mean, the idea of a new road and the flow and a southwesterly exposure to get some great lighting is always, I think, pretty nice, and the flat design definitely is very attractive. Can you clarify one thing that you had said? Is the road cost currently in the price of the 196 million?
Yes, it is.
So if Burlington were to chip in, there could be some potential savings?
Correct.
Thank you.
These are comparative costs to cover the elements of each plan in relationship to each other. So there's still a lot of refinement that needs to happen to look at those costs and put downward pressure on all of these prices.
Great, thanks. So, I mean, there certainly seems to be some appeal to option D. Option C.1, obviously, is the only real option on the table for students if they want to play basketball and have their friends come easily see them play basketball or whatever the sports are and use that option A, or the building A. It seems like that's the really only choice on the table. To A also makes use of A building. Option A also makes use of A building during construction. During construction, thank you. My big comment or question would be, and maybe it's an ask, the Burlington Technical Center is such a key resource that we have, and it's been so well used and I think underused and underappreciated maybe in a lot of ways. There are many other school systems in the area that use the Burlington Technical Center. What sort of pricing opportunities besides asking at the state level are there for Essex and the surrounding communities to chip in financially for this facility that they'll all be benefiting from?
Yeah, I appreciate the CTE question. We actually are building great partnership, I think, across the region for the catchment area of the CTE program and Burlington Technical Center. We actually have, if you don't mind me introducing you, we have the chair of the Regional Advisory Board for CTE. Chuck Lacey is here today. He's been really pushing the superintendents to work together, our boards to work together, to create more coherence and to make sure that we're working closer together. So that's something, they currently sending districts are paying through tuition. And so that's how the kind of pricing structure works. For me, I think it adds strength to our ask for support, right? That the region has a technical center that needs support right now, and we need workforce development, and we think CTE is going to help do that or be a part of that. So I think that's where there's some action.
I have a question in the chat. It says, it looks like demolition of the existing buildings has to be done before building starts for at least some of these options that are on the table. How long would this demo take and when can it begin?
The demo would likely begin roughly the same time frame that construction would start, which would be next summer. The demo could take, we have schedule estimates that it could take up to 18 months to 2 years. But it'll be phased throughout the projects.
Apple Tree Point Road, no children in the school. However, I understand the need for good schools, for good students, for the good future. So I commend all of you for all of the options, actually. My question is just a bit technical. I don't know who can answer it. Zoning and rezoning. Are all the options subject to the school district seeking a rezone permit? And will that impact the decision on April 27th?
Yeah, so we're currently working with the city and the zoning commission on zoning to get the building, the site zoned for a school. So that's a work in progress. We've been in communication with the city since before I got here on zoning. And so that is a part of the work we're doing now to ensure that the building is zoned as the land is zoned as a school.
And we've engaged on the particulars of all of these options so that lot coverage, height, some of the elements of that new zoning will conform to what we're designing. So they're been very good at communicating with us and working with us regarding the development of these plans.
Do we have another question in the audience? Rachel, I know that you've been holding, so I think you could ask another question, and then I can take one from the chat. And we have about 3 minutes left that we've sort of earmarked for this portion.
Thanks. My name's Rachel Jolly. I'm a parent of a current sixth grader and community member. So just another question, kind of prompted actually by the neighbors of the closest neighbors, is can you say anything about noise and/or traffic effects that would be different from one option to another? Like obviously option D is closer to North Avenue, but given the design, how do you imagine any of them, impacting noise levels and/or traffic levels?
Yeah, I'll pass that over, but I think the thing that we've been very mindful of is both accessibility beyond car accessibility. So we need to be really thoughtful about connection to the bike path, connection to North Ave on bus, on bike. Ideally, we want to create a school building that doesn't require so much car access, right? That is our goal. And we won't get there right away, but we have to be mindful of that as we build. So what these buildings all do is they're very mindful of traffic flow, which our old building is not. So these allow for movement, for drop off, right? So it's a much smoother movement for traffic through the site. So that's the first thing. And I don't see any difference between sort of sound and those impacts. I think traffic would be better than it was before when we were in there. And yeah, sound I don't see an issue with. But.
Yeah, just to add a little bit to
Please.
that. We do have a traffic engineer working with us to look at the existing intersection, and we are proposing some improvements to that Institute Road, North Ave intersection. We're looking at pedestrian movements, bicycle movements, improving Institute Road itself. Carl was talking a lot about the separation of buses and cars and drop-off. So that's a major improvement that we have in all of these plans compared to the existing conditions. I had 2 children go through the school and went to drop off many years, and this is going to be a vast improvement to that. So I think the overall A, B, and C are all equal in really improving existing conditions.
Okay, we will take one more question. Does the phased approach for option C1 potentially mean new classroom space that could be occupied earlier than in other options?
Not really, because you're starting the demolition remediation, you're starting the new construction, and you're working in both directions. So probably not. The best way to control a construction site is to have access to the whole thing at once. And so that's the debate going on, having A in operation with public use while a major construction project is going on of this nature. So we're working through those pros and cons. They'll be developed in much further detail once we get into schematic design. So we're thinking that you shouldn't pick an option purely just on whether building A is in one of these options or not. There's costs on both sides.
Great. We'll do one more question, and then we're going to transition to our sort of feedback session.
Thank you, I appreciate that. My name is Donna, and I am a neighbor across the street from the high school as well, living in that development. And I support the rebuild of the school. I'm absolutely assume that you guys have dreamed up the most perfect solution. So that's not what my perspective is and where I'm coming from. I'm hearing a lot about partnership and that you've checked in with the community, but I'm not hearing anything about what is the impact to us across the street. I can tell you right now with the apartment designs or the building designs, my property immediately becomes less desirable. You're talking about a major construction project over the period of 2 or 3 years, understood. The high school has not had a history for the residents across the street of being a good neighbor. From noise to floodlights in our living room, to children coming on our property and leaving garbage, debris, drug paraphernalia. I'm very concerned that this is being rushed through, and I'm not hearing about what is the impact to us breathing in the air, the PCPs that you're going to be digging up to get rid of. I appreciate that it has to be done, but I'm not hearing anything about protecting your neighbors across the street, about being a good community member, and including us in that.
Got it. So we hear that the call to communicate and engage with the neighbors across North Ave. So I'm committed to doing that. Yeah.
Okay, so at this time, it's 7:10, this will leave us about 15, 20 minutes. We're gonna break into 3 groups, and I'm gonna ask you to self-select. We're gonna have one architect here at these front tables, and we'll push the tables together and we can sort of huddle around. We'll have an additional architect in the back of the room at those tables, and we'll ask the architects to push the tables together and huddle around. And then in the sort of library annex to your right, my left, we'll have one more architect. My ask here today is that you would take a survey card with you or remember to visit the site. If I heard someone in the audience saying, how can we possibly be asked to make a decision or give feedback tonight? I respect that and I appreciate that. So my ask is that you do it in the next week if you have time to look more, if you need more time to give us your feedback. If you haven't had a question answered tonight, please send it to superintendent@bsdvt.org. If you're watching the Zoom, please stay with me and I'm going to drop a link to the survey. And you can also ask questions in that survey. You can fill out the survey and ask questions in there and we'll do our best to get back to you too. So, thank you. Please proceed to breakouts.
All right.